Hello, health champions. How would you like to just turn on your body's healing power and restorative powers? What if there was like a switch? You could just flip it on and it turned out that it was just as important or even more important than the nutrition that you get, than the exercise that you do, than the supplements that you take, and even your gut health. You could even call that switch the ultimate biohack. And I'm not saying that this biohack would take the place of nutrition and exercise and supplements and working toward your gut health. All of those are still important. But what if you could do something that would increase, that would 10x the effectiveness and the value and the power of all the other things that you're doing to move toward health? And for some people, it might be the most important thing that they could do. It might be the piece that they've been missing, but they keep missing it very often because it's too simple, it's too abstract. We're living in a material world, so we pretty much just believe what we can see. So let's just agree on something up front here, that everyone has a central nervous system. That means you have a brain and a spinal cord. And the central nervous system regulates everything about you, every single function. And therefore, when I say everything, I mean everything. There is no process in the body that is not supervised and regulated by your central nervous system. So why do we even have one? So in the simplest level, we can say that there are single cell organisms. That means it's a single cell. It doesn't need a nervous system. This is each man for himself. There is no one else to communicate with. There's no need to communicate to other cells. But as soon as you become a multicellular organism, now these cells need a way to communicate with each other. These cells need to cooperate to increase the probability of survival, because if they work together, they can specialize and they can do different things better than the other cells. Now, humans, we don't have 5 cells. We have somewhere around 40 trillion cells. And the reason we are so successful at surviving is that we have a fantastic central nervous system that has optimized the cooperation between all of our cells. And the portion of your central nervous system that regulates this communication between all your 40 trillion cells is called your autonomic nervous system. Autonomic just means automatic. It happens without you having to think about it. And actually, for every thought that you have, there's about 1 million different things going on in the background, literally. Your autonomic nervous system processes billions of bits of information every second, whereas your thinking mind processes thousands of bits of information per second. So everything that works in your body without you having to think about it, such as breathing and heart rate and blood pressure and digestion, all of these things don't happen by themselves. They are done for you by your autonomic nervous system. Now, this ANS has 2 branches that work against or balance each other, and you've probably heard of these. They're called the fight, flight, and the feed, breed. And to help you remember that, you can think of the 4 F's, which of course is fighting, fleeing, feeding, and procreation. But we really need to understand what this is all about. What's the purpose? What are we really doing here? And the answer is we're allocating resources. Everything is about resources. Every species, every animal's survival depends on resources. And just like we had a single cell, they have limited resources. Your 40 trillion cells have limited resources, but they can work better if they work together. So that's all of what the autonomic nervous system does. And another name for the fight-flight is the sympathetic. It just means the thing that speeds things up. And the other name for the feed-breed is the parasympathetic, and that just means the other one, basically the one that balances that out. So anytime that you get into a situation where you need to fight or flee, now your body is going to increase your blood pressure. Your sympathetic nervous system is going to release adrenaline that will make your heart squeeze harder and faster. So your heart rate also goes up. You'll have vasoconstriction. So now the heart pushes harder against more resistance. So the blood starts traveling really, really fast. And anytime you're in fight flight, you're going to need lots and lots of energy. So the adrenaline already produces some energy. But then a few minutes into the process, now we also increase cortisol, which the purpose is to increase blood sugar, which of course is the emergency fuel that we have. Another thing that happens is that we downregulate the LDL receptors, the ones that uptake LDL on the liver, so that our cholesterol, our LDL cholesterol goes up. And why would we do that? Because at the same time, our clotting factors will increase because LDL is a component of these clotting factors. So anytime that you're in a fight, there's a chance that you get scratched up and you start bleeding. So this is all about supporting your short-term survival. And the parasympathetic now does different things. It will increase resources for digestion. It will send the blood carrying energy to make enzymes and to circulate lots of blood to absorb nutrients from your digestive tract. It will circulate blood and provide resources for your immune system. It will circulate blood to improve and support reproductive function. You know, that makes the man parts and the lady parts work properly. And it will also increase resources for your DNA repair and for your healing. And everybody really wants to be healthy. And they understand that digestion and immune system and repair and all this stuff is really, really important for healing. So when I ask people what's more important here, a lot of people will actually answer, well, the parasympathetic is more important. But that's not true, because the sympathetic is about your short-term survival. And if you don't survive the next 5 seconds, then there is nothing left to heal for next month and next year. And that's why we're wired the way we are. We need to take care of the urgent first, and then we can get back to healing. Now, the thing to understand about these two branches is that most modern humans are not in balance. You want to think about this as a seesaw. And we said that it's a resource allocation system, and we have limited resources. You only have about 5 liters of blood, a little more or a little less depending on your body size. But this blood contains all the resources, all the nutrients, all the oxygen to take the resources to the body parts that are going to use them. So if we send more one way to the sympathetic, to the heart and the muscles to defend you, then there's going to be less sent to your digestive tract and your vital organs. So just like a seesaw, when one thing goes down, the other goes up. And it has to be that way. We're borrowing from somewhere. So you can think about this resource allocation as a faucet. And you have 2 faucets. You have one for your sympathetic and one for your parasympathetic. Now, the problem is that most people are going to have their sympathetic turned on, which means that they're going to have their parasympathetic turned off. For the most part, humans live our modern lives with the parasympathetic chronically, partially turned off. We're depriving ourselves of that healing function. So now we're not healing properly, our bodies are not balanced, we're not in harmony. So we try to solve the problem by eating the right foods, but our digestion isn't working. And then we wonder why we can't get the nutrients and why our bodies don't heal and why we have erectile dysfunction and why we have immune deficiencies. So then we go and we take some supplements, but we can't absorb the supplements, and the supplements still don't help because we don't have our healing turned back on. So I hope you can see how far-reaching this is, that for some people it's going to be the key component, the thing that you have been missing. And if you have stress and you're trying to eat right and you're trying to exercise and you're trying to take supplements, then you may be wasting some of that effort. And I think most of you can relate, because most people will say that I have way more stress now than I did even a few years ago. But in regards to that, we need to understand what the stress response is. So the thing that we're calling stress, when we say I have a stressful life, I have a lot of stress, to some degree it's about how much you take on, and you can certainly choose to take on more or less in many cases, but the stress we're talking about is a stress response. And what do I mean by that? Well, stress is an inside job. And we're talking about the traffic being stressful and people are stressful and all the events and chores are stressful, but all of those things, they're outside of you. They're independent of you. What makes them stressful is that you have a stress response. You have a reaction to them. And that is an inside job. And these reactions, of course, will manifest as things like worry, fear, anger, and just generalized stress. Now, stress responses are absolutely necessary for survival. If you lose your ability to have a stress response, you're basically a sitting duck. However, if we let that become chronic stress responses, now we live in that chronic state, which becomes very, very unhealthy. And the thing we need to understand is that you can turn it off. Just because you're reacting to something in the outside world and you have a stressful reaction doesn't mean that you need to carry that with you for the rest of the day. If you develop some techniques and some skills, then you can have your stress response and you can turn it off a minute later. Now, in chiropractic and holistic health, we talk about the triad of health very often. And one way to think about this is like a triangle or a table with 3 legs. And if you have 3 legs, then this can stand very sturdy. But if you're missing one of the legs or one of the legs is shorter, you're going to have a very wobbly table, or it might come crashing down altogether. So one side is chemical, and that is anything to do with biochemistry. That's your nutritional status, your toxic load, inflammation, etc. Then you have your structural, which is your posture, your flexibility, your movement habits, how much signaling stimulation does your body get from the movement. And then we have the emotional, mental aspect, which is the more abstract, which is what we're talking about today, the stress. And a lot of people will try things like diet, which is a great idea. A lot of people will try exercise and stretching, which is a great idea. But not so many people will take the emotional aspect as seriously as the other two. And which one is the most important? Well, if you need 3 sides, then they're all important, but you also can't neglect one. And I believe the emotional or the stress aspect of things, the emotional well-being, we sort of take it for granted. We don't believe that it's something that we need to work on consistently, that we need to prioritize. And therefore, I feel it is by far the most neglected and also by far the most underappreciated for the impact it could have. So the key here is regular practice. Just like you can learn to speak a language or you could learn to play an instrument, it's not going to happen in 1 day or 1 week over 5 minutes. But if you do 5 to 10 minutes on a regular basis, now you start learning a skill. And the other thing to understand is you want to do this ahead of time. You prepare your nervous system. You don't do it in the middle of your worst crisis. It's too late. You're not going to have much of an impact in that moment. You need to make this part of your everyday lifestyle. And we need to understand you can teach your autonomic nervous system. It is hardwired and it can change. And the name for this is called neuroplasticity. Your nervous system, the pathways, the synapses, they are semi-solid, but they are moldable. Okay, they're hardwired in, but they're changeable. That's what neuroplasticity is. It has a certain structure and a certain solidity, but it doesn't mean it's there forever. The other thing to understand is that when we say that practice makes perfect, that's not true. Practice makes permanent, and that's what neuroplasticity means. Your brain and nervous system, it will rewire itself to the skills that you expose it to. So whatever you do on a regular basis becomes more or less permanent. And therefore, what it means is you get really good at what you do the most. So if you practice relaxing a lot, then you get really good at that. Your nervous system will tend to find that relaxed state automatically. But if you practice a lot of anger, if you practice a lot of fear, if you practice a lot of worry, then that means you get really, really good at that too. So one of my favorite things to do is a breathing exercise. I've done some videos on that where I explain that a little bit more. But basically, breathing is the only physiological mechanism that you have voluntary control over. You can't decide directly to increase or decrease your blood pressure. You can't decide to increase your heart rate, but you can change your breath rate. You can decide to breathe slower or breathe faster. And the fascinating thing about this is that when you breathe in, you're activating a little bit of a sympathetic response, a little sympathetic stimulation. And when you breathe out, you're activating parasympathetic stimulation. So here is actually one aspect of physiology that you can control to start balancing the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And the key is to breathe out slower. So basically 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. That creates a nice balance. And the next thing you could do is visualizations. If you visualize a peaceful place, your own little sacred place, it doesn't have to be real. You create it and you visualize it while you're breathing. And now you start feeling really good. You're starting to train your autonomic nervous system into a parasympathetic state. You can also practice letting go, for example. All the things that we're holding on to, all the things that we think are important, most of the time you can let it go. It doesn't mean that you don't want it. It doesn't mean that you give it up. It just means you're giving up your emotional attachment to it in this moment, and you give yourself a break. And one of the most powerful ways, of course, is meditation. It takes some work, but it's a combination of all these different things where you're just trying to calm down, you're trying to slow down your mind. And there's lots of videos, there's lots of guided meditation, there's lots of courses and books and techniques. The key is that you decide to start doing something and you make it a regular practice. So if you do this for 30 days now, is your life going to be completely transformed and healed? Well, in some cases, you might be surprised. In other cases, it might just take a little bit longer. Regardless, I promise that you will be moving closer to the state of health that you're looking for. And if you're looking for some resources to help you along, I'll put some information down below. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to love that one. And if you truly want to master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, and turn on all the notifications so you never miss a life-saving video.